Hey there, John the Raven here for John's Sword Discovery. Welcome to this newest edition of the channel. Today I want to show an interesting weapon that is also a waster or a wooden training version of the same weapon instead of just being the actual live weapon of steel or iron and wood and so forth. This is a waster training version of the same. Hopefully in the near future we'll have a live version of the same piece. But for you Lord of the Rings fans and those who appreciate functional, well-designed fantasy pieces, we have here a training version of the High Elven War Sword. For those of you who enjoy the Lord of the Rings Peter Jackson films from early in the 2000s, this will probably be familiar firstly from the prologue of the Fellowship of the Ring, where they're fighting in Mordor on, I believe it's the Daggerlit Plain, the prologue. Everyone's probably remembers that at the very beginning, that big battle in the start of the Fellowship, and the line of High Elven warriors. It kind of had like that domino effect where it's like coming down the line, and they were swiping out the orcs. This is what they used. In some more recent sources, maybe canonical, maybe non-canonical, I've heard this referred to as a Lhang or a Lhang. I believe that's how they pronounced Lhang in English would be how it's spelled. And this is kind of one of the quintessential swords from the film. Its shape and proportion, it's almost halfway like a two-handed sword, halfway like a short polearm. It's almost got the sort of 1-to-1 ratio as far as the blade to handle proportion, which is very interesting. That's a very rare and uncommon thing in historical weapons, though you do occasionally see it the closest equivalent that some may recognize that is the Japanese nagamaki, which often features that unique aspect, and I consider it to be the characteristic aspect of that weapon. It's usually a 1-to-1 blade to haft ratio, or a slightly on and off, slightly longer blade or a slightly longer handle, but more or less a 1-to-1, or one is slightly longer than the other, the haft of the blade, but otherwise fairly close to that proportion. That's kind of a main characteristic of the Japanese nagamaki, and it's also one of the main characteristics of this unique weapon also. Of course, as I said in the beginning, this is a waster, a training version, but a very well made one. This is actually made by a craftsman. I believe he's basically one-man operation out of England. He does a lot of wooden training weapons, wooden swords and other things, wasters and training versions of weapons. And his pieces are known for their excellent craftsmanship, their weight, their balance, very good fit and finish for a wooden training weapon made with traditional materials. And he mostly uses traditional techniques, although most everyone uses some modern, very mild, I guess you could say, automation, maybe mills and lathes. Most craftsmen do, or I did with my old business. But it's still essentially all handmade. And this is a good piece, fairly expensive for a waster. Definitely not something you're going to pick up for 20 or 30 or 50 or even maybe 80 some dollars. It's a little bit higher than that. I think it retailed for somewhere in the mid to low 100 USD range. But excellently weighted, excellently balanced. Of course, this is primarily a two-handed weapon if we go by what we see in the films, and very well designed in that respect for how it's made to be used and carried. Again, I always like this style from when I first saw it. It just has that uniqueness, and especially this unique recurved sort of blade where you can see it starts with one width and actually gradually widens towards the tip, which of course you do see in many different types of historical sword as well as polearm forms. But it seems to just, from an aesthetic as well as a functional perspective, work very well with this overall type. And of course you have this nice little indentation, this sort of concave section here. It would be the base or the fort, or perhaps the ricasso of the blade if you were to consider ricasso, but at the very least the base or fort of the blade. And it in a way serves as a very simple sort of a guard or defensive feature, whereas an enemy's blade would come down here and either get deflected off or momentarily trapped, or it could be parried or moved aside in a number of variety of ways. And I believe that's the intended function, a very simple but effective sort of proto guard, you might almost call it. And of course the hilt attaches and meets together right here at this section, like it would in most forms of hilted weapons. In the live steel version, I believe this is actually a bronze or a brass piece here, but it's not. It's just, in this training version, it's just one continuous piece. In the live steel version, I believe it was brass or bronze as a separate piece here. And of course, there was a decorative wrap, almost like a foliage wrap, which was typical of the Elven aesthetic, which was part of their decorative sort of language, if you will, that sort of permeated in all of their arms and armor. A heavy emphasis on natural elements, particularly foliage, flowers, various types of tree, leaf, and plant sort of effigies and motifs throughout. And of course, but also that served as a good additional grip, similar to what you might see in some East Asian, obviously some Japanese and Chinese weapons, where you have the maki or the wrap, as well as in some other cultures too. It served a generally similar purpose, except I think the intention there was that it was actually supposed to be a thin band of bronze or brass. And then it was also leather covered in that one, whereas this is just one smooth, continuous piece. You can actually see he uses two different portions, two different pieces of wood. I believe the blade is at least a hardwood, and I think the haft is a second hardwood. You can see assembled in two pieces very closely and tightly here, so it's excellent fit and finish in that regard. And two different stains here that partially reflect, I think, the type of stain finish he used, but also the type of wood. Again, I think they were both hardwoods, but of a couple different varieties. Off the top of my head, I don't recall what they are, but I'll try to look them up and add that later. Again, also with this form of recurve, it comes in concave, swells outward, comes back again to a nice butt. It not only has such an elegant look to it, but it really is good in holding, where you can get so many different kind of grips, from probably your more longer, wider arc here in use for very long strikes, using the best amount of leverage and longest grip you can, but then you can also choke up for a different kind of grip here, more in the middle, which of course will extend and lengthen the relative reach that you have in comparison to the grip. Or for the longest possible reach, I would theorize in swiping or striking at a mounted opponent, possibly cavalryman. Of course, this is, again, an infantry weapon, very much primarily designed as a foot soldier's piece, but using here, this could swipe or reach up to better effectively combat a cavalryman or a horseman, or someone perhaps even on a warg or some other sort of creature that would still be categorized as cavalry, or your more typical horseman on a horse. So there's a great deal of variety that can be used there. Nice wide slashes, or how it would effectively be used. This really is not designed to thrust in any real meaningful way, but it is possible to get some sort of a hooking strike that can at least potentially do some damage, particularly to a lightly armored or someone, an opponent only armored, using something like textile or very soft armor, not really penetrating too much, but still a jab is technically possible with the right technique. Wide slashes and cuts, as well as draw cuts, are very possible and effective with this style of blade. And of course, we're using this as it is as a training weapon, but it accurately, in my opinion, simulates as best as any well-designed training version of any other weapon the overall method of usage and how it would react as close as it could to the live version. Of course, weight and balance are going to be notably different in this piece. The live version is going to be heavier and balanced a little bit differently, so that's always something to consider, but that's always true with almost any form of training weapon, at least when it's done in traditional wood, as it would have been in earlier periods with what we typically call wasters. But in that regard, this in and of itself is very well balanced and an excellent weight. I'd say it weighs about 1 1/4 pounds approximately. Overall length is around 3.5 to 4 feet, with the widest portion being right here. That's probably about 2.5 inches or so, and somewhat narrower here, about, let's say, just under 2 inches, or 1 3/4 to 2 inches at the base of the blade. And of course there's also a bit of a narrowing taper here, at least on the side and the width when viewed from this perspective for the haft. But again, it all comes together both functionally and visually in such a unique weapon. And I really like this, and I'm glad to have this piece as an excellent training version for this style of weapon, the High Elven War Sword. It functions very well. Even various non-conventional strikes work well with this piece. And so all around it's really a pleasure to handle and use. Hopefully a live still version I will have made and acquired in the near future, and we can have a good enjoyable time looking into and exploring that, and then also making a compare and contrast this later. But for now, that'll conclude this nice piece to have. I'll try to post the name of the maker at a later time. If someone wants to reach out for this or some of the many other models that he makes, they can do that. But we'll see about that in the future. For now, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe. Hit those 2 like and subscribe buttons. And we'll see you again next time for another edition of John's Sword Discovery. See you then. Bye-bye.